Hey there, comic fam. Welcome back to Climbing Comics. In today's session, we'll be chatting about my comic reads of 2020. Hey there again, comic fam. Welcome back to Climbing Comics. So, about a week ago, I had a really good conversation with my buddy Johnny. He's my comic buddy I do my podcast with. Definitely check out the podcast link below, where we brought up a really good topic about what we read during the year of 2020, right? Some of our favorites, some of our not so favorites, why we read certain things, and just the real big expansion of the reading that we've done this year. So kind of coming into this past year, I was asking myself, where do I start, essentially? So this is where, I first talked to my friend Johnny. I talked to people that work at or patrons of my LCS just to get some ideas. I reached out to the Instagram community, the YouTube community, and, asked for recommendations. So some of the things that I found were that there are some people that really like the mainstays of comic books, right? The Batmans, the Spider-Man, Superman, X-Men, things like this, where the whole story essentially starts from the beginning of their timeline, right? Some books started in the 60s, some in the 70s, and so on and so forth. And then I got other recommendations where people like compartmentalized story arcs, where you only have 6 issues to read, or 12 issues, or 20 issues, and the whole story is contained from beginning to end in that series, right? So I got a little bit of mix of both, right? So outside of those two, this past year, I also included some of my, my 2020 comic knowledge goals included reading a lot of the first appearances. So that meant like reading a lot of like the first appearance of Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and a ton of different characters, right? And I also put it upon myself to start reading the original ASMs, right? I essentially got through 1 through the 20s. And I've noticed a big change in how things were written back then versus how they are now. For example, you read issue 10 of ASM, and then Stan and essentially summarizes everything that happened in 1 through 9, so you understand what's going on in 10. But now with everything moving to digital, you could, and omnibuses and trade paperbacks, TPBs, you could read whole story arcs in one sitting, and you essentially don't necessarily need to have all of this prose in terms of to catch you up as a reader if you're kind of just jumping in the middle, right? So what I wanted to do and what my friend Johnny recommended me to do is make a list. And, I love writing on backing boards, so I did make my list here. And at first, when I was prepping for this show, I was thinking, oh man, I probably didn't read that much this year. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Then I started writing things down, and it started kind of exploding, right? So I have a list from DC, a list from Marvel, a list from Image. I'll consider those the big 3 because Image is definitely coming up there. And then there are these kind of smaller publishers, but they are definitely growing because their stories are great. Boom Studios, Dark Horse, AWA, and a bunch of different publishing companies are coming out with great content. A lot of these smaller publishers bring in some of these creators, these Donny Cates, these James Tinians, and allow them free range to write their stories and kind of maybe even own some of the characters they build out. So you see a lot of people who are really, really great in their Marvel and DC universes having their opportunity to write stories on their own. And, things have been going crazy in terms of a lot of the books themselves, right? I've realized that I don't only just like superhero books, but I also like, horror books. I also like non-superhero books that are just about, normal people living their lives and doing their things, right? So I wanted to list down some of the story arcs and some of the ongoing series that I started reading, and definitely would definitely recommend some of these. So I'll start off with DC. I was very surprised by this. I never really played the game Injustice, but the books I could not put down. I was literally just like going through all of the series, all of like they'll have a whole chapter that's essentially the main superheroes. Then they'll have a whole storyline of just the gods, and a whole storyline of all the magic characters, and it just kind of like the bang for your buck in each of these series just kept me reading over and over again, right? So outside of that, you know, Dan Slott's Superior Spider-Man, that was a surprise. And my friend Johnny brought up a very good point. It doesn't really matter like what kind of crazy storyline you put a character in. So, spoiler alert, essentially Doc Ock takes over, the mind and body of Spider-Man. And so thus he's the superior Spider-Man. You get these ideas, but if you put a good writer behind it and a good storyline, it becomes great, right? So outside of this, other DC books that I read, Justice League Dark, a lot of those this year. Some of the big story arcs that I read, just to kind of fill in some of the gaps that were recommended for me from my friend Johnny. First off was The Tower of Babel. This is essentially, like, I think a 6-part miniseries of, this is a comic trope that is used quite a bit in from the movies and in the comics today, where Batman essentially has all of these ways to bring down each member of the Justice League, right? Just in case they go crazy or, he needs to take them down. He has a plan specific to that person's ability to take them down. So this comes from the miniseries Tower of Babel. I didn't realize that until my friend Johnny told me about it. 2 other story arcs recommended to me by Pretty Fly for a Filipino guy are Dark Knight Venom. So this is essentially pre-Bane. So this is a really cool, different kind of perspective of Batman. And I most recently read Identity Crisis, and it's dark, but it definitely brings to light like what would happen if a superhero was like kind of in real life, right? So outside of those DC books, there's some Black Label books that I didn't realize that I like horror books until I read these. So these are the Hill House Comics subgenre of DC Black Label. So I've read The Dollhouse Family and Basket Full of Heads. So just if you enjoy horror, please just definitely take a look and recommend some of the horror books that you like. I think what really got me into this was when I was doing my first appearance summaries last year. I did Swamp Thing. So this is House of Secrets 92. Once I read that, and they had like 4 different horror storylines in there, I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. This is very different, right? So it's kind of nice to read a ton of superhero, then change it up, read some horror, read some, independence about something completely different. And yeah, it just is a fun and nice balance. What tied together DC and Marvel this year is during Halloween, it was fun. Me and my friend Johnny did a podcast as well as about Marvel Zombies and Deceased, to try to take a look at how each of these publishing companies take on an approach of having a zombie-like world, right? It was a very different look and feel, which kind of matches what we thought were the look and feel of the movies as well, right? So the feel-good, fun, kind of that dark humor, comedy type thing. We kind of shifted to Marvel, and then the DC was a little bit more serious, so maybe a little bit like the movies that way. In terms of Marvel, switching gears here, Immortal Hulk definitely was great. Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender, that was really good as well. I'm really glad my friend Johnny recommended that. And I mentioned before Superior Spider-Man by Dan Slott. Donny Cates. I looked at my list, and a lot of it is Donny Cates. From Venom, which started in 2018. I didn't realize that you could take, a minor character from the original series of Spider-Man and spin off and create a great storyline for Venom himself. Thor, I didn't think I'd like reading Thor because, I read a couple of the old Thors, and it was kind of harder for me to read because of the style of writing. But with him writing Thor right now, definitely recommend to read that. Silver Surfer Black, This was just like a short series I read earlier this past year, and I like these kind of like short one shots, or they kind of will feed into the story into the future, because I think he'll be as part of the King in Black series. I read the X-Men Fantastic Four crossover, kind of not a one shot, but I think it was like 4 issues. The Dawn of X. Dawn of X. I think Marauders and the X-Men 2 series, which I would definitely recommend this year. So those are my DC and Marvel reads from this past year. I took a look at what I read in terms of Boom Studios, Image, and Dark Horse. Boom Studios, Something is Killing the Children. A lot of people had talked about this. It took me a while to read it. I'm not fully through it with it yet. I've only read the first couple issues, but definitely recommend that. Image, Department of Truth. Yeah. Crossover, Donny Cates again. Oh, a lot of Donny Cates. It's really good. Dark Horse. So I actually really like the show Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sadly, they stopped the cartoon series after Korra, The Legend of Korra, but they actually continue the storylines in Dark Horse comic books. So I most recently read The Search. No spoilers, but this has to do with Zuko's mom, and it expands on the world. It brings in new characters, expands on their their lore, essentially, right? It's really great. My friend Johnny recommended Harrow County. So he recommended it to me because it's both magic and it's also a little bit of horror. So, maybe I might change things up and read a little bit of that. I've come to realize, just listing all of these out, legacy books which continue versus self-contained miniseries, I like a balance of both, right? I like to continue to read the main storylines of these Spider-Mans, but kind of now that there's, for example, Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen, I've been collecting both of those series. I think they're definitely mainstays in the Marvel universe now. It's kind of crazy. Talking to my nieces and nephews and kind of looking at, books and storylines through their eyes, their Spider-Man when they're growing up is not the Spider-Man I knew when I was growing up. They're actually growing up with Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen along with the Peter Parker. So it's kind of cool to see that. So I really like this, both legacy and self-contained books, because, sometimes I just want to finish the story, read those 6 issues, and then just kind of close things out. Wow. I did not realize how many books I read this year, how many different storylines I read this year, but I want to continue to read these first appearances, because I think the first appearance stories gives me a little bit of breadth of knowledge with all these different types of characters. And then if I find something I like, then I'll kind of dive into it. I think I do want to get a little bit more into the Doctor Strange books, because a lot of his storylines were, psychedelic. They were cool. They were different. The art of that time, during that time, the panels were, it was crazy. It was really cool. This coming year, some of the things that were recommended to me and I definitely want to read are, one, I'm going to finish the Infinity Gauntlet. Next, I'm going to read the X-Men Messiah Complex. This is with Hope Summers, as well as the Ultimates, right? Ultimate Spider-Man and whatnot. Definitely thank you to my friends out there, Javi, Mayor Tyler, for recommending some of these books as well. There's a ton. This past year, I didn't even go over some of the old stuff that I read from this past year, right? I read some of the Secret Wars books. I'm kind of going through all of these like big story arcs that Marvel had, and there's so much more. I actually thought this was going to be quite short of a list and quite short of a video, but just going through this, there's so much more to read and so much more to learn about. So, hopefully I'll continue and find that niche that I like, and kind of keep diving into each of those things. So now I want to switch this up and pose the question to you. what were your favorite reads this year, regardless of publisher, Marvel, DC, Image, Boom Studios, AWA, anything. Like the Turtles, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming back, right? I know people are really into that with Kevin Eastman. So what are your favorite reads this past year? What's waiting in your short box or your long box for you to read? Because I still have a lot to read and catch up for myself. And what would you recommend, right? Going through this list, I actually couldn't find one I didn't like. There's some stories that kind of, were harder to read and were longer, but I guess I'm an optimist when it comes to reading all these books. So tell me what you've liked, what you didn't like, what you would recommend, because I want to add more to this list. This is a growing list, and a lot of the stories have been great, and I definitely want to expand my knowledge and have fun while doing it. So great. So if you like this content and you want to hear more about the stories that I've been bringing and just bringing this community together, please definitely click that thumbs up button, subscribe, and also click on that bell icon to get notified of any new content that I come out with. I'm just so excited for this upcoming year. There's a lot more to read, and I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it. So essentially, from my comic journey to yours, keep reading. Thanks all. Bye.